there is a larger tapestry that we find ourselves in. Things that happen for a reason. And once you can embrace that, embrace that, I'm purely confident that down the road, 20 years from now, I'm going to look back on my life and see how things fell into place to lead me to where I needed to be, both as a father, as a husband, as a soldier, as a son of God. Like, things were happening the way they're supposed to happen. There's this old Greek quote that they would say, like, amor fate, to love your fate, love fate. That if you can fight it all you want and pretend that things aren't happening the way they're supposed to, and just throw your arms up and say that the whole world's combined against me, or you can embrace your fate, embrace where you are, and see it for what it is, as a stepping stone in this tapestry of life that's setting you to where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
So a long way to talk about it, but to me, humility is first and foremost a modest view of yourself, to be teachable, and then lastly, to have pure confidence, not self-confidence, not like confidence that Chaz can do it.
It was beautiful to watch. I think what you ultimately learned coming out of that was, that it wasn't doable under your own strength. You had to rely on God. You had to trust in God,
100%.
and you had to trust others to come alongside and help you. And only those that, with a modest view of their own importance, are able to do that, embracing humility to the point of being able to accept that from others and understand that my level of control is minimal compared to God. And if I put this in God's hands and truly have trust and faith in Him, I'm going to be okay.
Welcome to the Serving with Faith podcast, a show exploring Christian leadership principles in today's military. Now, here is your host, Michael Cuddy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Serving with Faith podcast. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're going to jump into a new series, Lead Like Jesus. And we're going to look at some iconic attributes of Jesus' leadership style that we should be applying as military leaders. And these are attributes that are not really talked about very much, at least not very prominent in the realm of professional development for military leaders, but attributes I think are critical at making a huge impact to not only the force for the military, but soldiers' lives. Things that we emulate, and soldiers are going to look back and remember those types of leaders as being very impactful. And today we have a very special guest with us, Lieutenant Colonel Chaz Allen, who is currently serving as Eagle 3, a senior aviation trainer and operations group at the Army's National Warfighting Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, NTC. His role is to observe, coach, and train Army units in the crucible of large-scale combat in a training area the size of Delaware, ultimately to ensure America's ready for the next war. So doing some really amazing things out there. And shortly, he and his family are going to move to Korea for a joint staff assignment and a subsequent Apache battalion command. He's married with 5 children, feels very lucky every single day that God has blessed him with the sacred opportunity of being a husband and a father. And I'll say Lieutenant Colonel Allen is one of the very few in the Army that serves as a role model for myself. I'm very picky and choosy about who I look at and try and model leadership styles, things here and there from really leadership perspectives. Colonel Allen is one of the few that truly embodies humility. So when I reached out to him and asked, would he be a part of this episode, he's like, absolutely. And I gave him a choice of topics and he chose humility. That honestly did not surprise me one bit. Colonel Allen is one of the few that when you look at him, the word humility immediately comes to mind. When we worked together, I remember observing his perspective on virtually every situation we encountered, and his approach was never negative, and it was always selfless, hallmarks of humility. You never saw him get upset, disappointed maybe, but never upset. His level of compassion for soldiers and the team always outweighed his desire to succeed. And because of it, I think the entire staff worked that much harder for him. And so it's an absolute honor, sir, to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Oh, Mike, thank you for letting me be a part of it. When you did reach out, I was just eager because you sent me a couple of options on things we could probably discuss. All of them were great topics. But to me, humility just jumped off the page as one that, since I've been here at the National Training Center, watching units come through back to back to back, there is a certain attribute that the units that have it seem to excel, and the units that lack it struggle. And that's humility versus arrogance. The mindset that soldiers can embrace and that leaders can embody with their teammates. So for me, humility right off the bat, I knew will be a fun topic to discuss. Not that I've mastered it at all. It's
Sure.
just a concept that to me, it it's important. It's important enough to where I feel like there's worth in putting energy towards understanding it.
Yeah.
And not to jump too quickly into the topic itself, but there's a couple of words that over the course of history have transformed their meaning. And I taught at West Point for a little bit in the language department, and we talk about the etymology of words, like
Mm.
where words came from, and how some words over time can transform, they can change. And just one quick example. I'm not trying to say that we need to change the current understanding of this word, but the word mediocrity,
Mhm.
mediocris, it used to be back in the day, it was a compliment to be a mediocre individual. It was a Renaissance man, where medi is like halfway, ocris is up the mountain. So you were halfway up the mountain. You were engaged in multiple pursuits. In ancient in like France back in the day, that was the Renaissance man ideal. And
Sure.
now mediocre is considered like you're not really a master of anything. It's got a negative connotation,
Yeah.
and I think it's unfortunate. Now, I'm not gonna try to change that. No one should be mediocre because the new meaning is it's not reaching your potential. So I'm not trying to
Yeah.
change that topic. And I'm worried though that humility, meekness and humility are going down that same track
Mm.
where a ideal that was good, it was a virtue not long ago, is suddenly becoming more and more sidelined and considered like a passive nature, a
Mhm.
somebody who's being acted upon, who's not willing to get out there and accomplish the mission. That's that's not what humility is. And the idea in our our dialogue preceding this, you put in the note like it's controlled strength, and I completely agree with that.
Sure.
It's the idea of not having an inflated view of yourself, being modest in your understanding of who you are, what you're capable of, and the who you are part, going back to a couple of your previous episodes about identity, is just a massive aspect of having actual humility, is understanding who you are in the big picture.
Yeah.
But to me, my main goal in coming on this podcast is I don't want the word humility to be seen in anything except for a positive light. If a
Absolutely.
leader says, "Hey, you're a humble guy," that should be a compliment. That should be something you're striving for. To be humble and teachable. And my grandpa, he was a Marine Force recon in Vietnam, did some pretty gnarly stuff, saw plenty of combat, 3 tours, and he described humility as pure self-confidence.
Mm.
The idea that you are not confident in yourself, but you have confidence that's coming from a higher source, a higher
Mhm.
power. People often quote that I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me.
Sure.
And the person who says that is expressing confidence that I can do all things. I'm going to get it done.
Yeah.
But they know it's not just them alone getting it done. It's them with this divine power behind them. That to me is a humble guy. They have confidence that they can accomplish a task, not because they're great. In fact, they probably know they're flawed and they can't do it themselves. But if they can tap into something beyond themselves or tap into the unity of an organization, a team,
Mhm.
well, then together, yeah, together we can do it. So I guess I'm excited to talk about humility.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it right on the head talking about humility is not weakness as a military leader. And I think the world is starting to try and change that a little bit, like you said, and give a negative connotation towards it. But it really is truly controlled strength. Matthew 11:29 says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So this is Jesus talking, and he's literally telling you, look, I'm humble in heart. That's a key attribute I have. And we look at moments in Jesus' life where that humility is demonstrated. The simple fact that he went from heaven and came down to earth to be a human, that's humility in a nutshell. Then washing the feet of disciples, things of that nature. There's all kinds of examples of humility, and so it's really important we understand that. We're going to jump into that. Let's go back to really defining humility first, though. Give me your thoughts again on what humility is as a military leader. I know you said a modest view of one's own importance. Kind of dissect that a little bit for me.
So as I mentioned earlier, the units I come through at NTC, some leaders, they come to this place that we call it the high desert. They come out to visit the desert and pretend to do large scale combat. And some leaders show up and they are eager to learn,
Hmm.
eager to grow, and they have a pretty modest view of themselves and their organization. That's not to say they're not proud of their team. That's not to say that they don't feel like they're prepared and that they've put effort in, that they've traveled through a gated training strategy to get them to this point, and that they have done their due diligence as leaders. But they still come saying, "I know there's more. I know that
Hmm.
once I get out there in the box and I'm tired, and fatigue is pressing against all my teammates, and our communication structure is suffering. We can't get a hold of the guys in the front line, or the aircraft are on a different comsec. Like there's some challenge we're trying to fight through.
Sure.
They know there's going to be things that emerge during the course of the training experience that will test their organization and that they can learn from. And so if they're teachable, they're humble, that modest view of yourself is just being realistic, recognizing that you're not perfect.
Yeah.
You personally are not perfect, and your team is not perfect and has room to grow. And that growth will come when you adopt this mindset of give me more. The Hagukari or the Bushido code of the ancient samurai, they say embrace hardship. Embrace hardship. The more the better. Because in their mind, and what they would teach their teams, or they would teach their junior samurai as they're coming up through the ranks, is this hardship is forging you into a better version of yourself. And so going through these crucibles, it's important because one, it does reveal your weaknesses
Sure.
that you can now work on, and two, it forces you to admit that you don't have it all figured out, to admit that you need help. It takes some courage to say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now, and it's time
Yeah.
for me to ask a question. It's time for me to reach out to, a teammate, or here at NTC, to talk to one of the mentors of the observer coach trainers who are going to be assigned to you. Just embrace that opportunity for dialogue. And then from a Christian perspective, it gives us a chance to ask God for help. We can kneel down and pray and say, hey, look, I'm at a point where I need help. Like it takes a second or it takes some humility to say, I can't figure this out myself. I
Yeah.
need something beyond me to help me get through. And often, talking to friends, sometimes you feel abandoned. Sometimes you still feel like you're enduring the dark night of the soul. But many times, folks feel invigorated, feel empowered. And even those guys who endure a tougher time and it does still feel like the dark night of the soul, eventually they come out of that. Eventually there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And like one of our old bosses used to say, that light at the end of the tunnel is not the exit, it's a train. Well, it's not always a train, right? Sometimes that light
Yeah.
at the end of the tunnel, it's inspiration. It's invigoration from something beyond you. And I've never actually met somebody who looks back and says that they've been completely abandoned when they've reached out in faith for something beyond themselves. Like I think that if we ask and ye shall receive, more often than not, we receive.
Yeah, absolutely. We only have a certain level of control when we truly recognize that our level of control pales in comparison to God's level of control. And we submit those things to God and say, God, you've got control of this. I can't do anything with it. It's yours. He shows up for us big time. If you talk about having a modest viewpoint of yourself and it opening up to growth, I think back to when I was a brand new second lieutenant. I came in the first day. I sat down with my platoon sergeant and said, hey, I don't know anything. I need you to help me become a better leader and the one I'm supposed to become. And immediately at that point, it's like a switch flipped. His viewpoint towards everything changed, and he took me under his wing and literally developed me into a really good, solid officer. And so I think having that modest viewpoint, like you said, is very important. And if you can choke down your pride long enough to do that, you'll have some great opportunities. Like Proverbs 11:2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with the humble is wisdom. And so that humility really enables you to tap into the power of God, which is his word. That's where his wisdom is coming from. It's when we're in the word of God. And so being able to submit to him and be humble enough to look at the word, take it and apply it to our own life, that's where wisdom is coming from. And then you got James 4:6 that says, but he gives more grace. Therefore it says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so we're being directed there to relinquish our pride and be humble. So, you mentioned humility is more of a pure form of confidence when I talked to you last. Can you expand on that and kind of how that applies to Philippians 4:13?
Absolutely. And again, I mentioned it came from my grandpa Elliot, who was as a kid growing up, you always look up to your father, your grandfather, the men in your life, they stand out. Well, this guy, just as a quick, I mentioned he's a Marine Force recon. He also was an athlete. Like he'd run marathons and he'd do 20 pull-ups, and he'd doing this in his 70s, just the kind of guy who was an active person. But I also remember that everywhere we went, we would go visit him in his house and in his neighborhoods, in his town. He would introduce himself and introduce me to his neighbors, people on the street, like, hey, this is my nephew, or this is my grandson Chaz. And he would just go out of his way to make other people feel loved and welcomed. And he was just the most kind guy. But
Yeah.
also, I know this man was a lethal warrior, like a warfighter who had seen multiple combat tours in Vietnam where things got tough. But yet, he still remained this very idealistic leader,
Hmm.
warrior who affected his community and always kept that. So to me, he seemed like a very confident person. He would
Sure.
talk to anybody. He would give speeches in front of large crowds. He would take on these crazy challenges, like he wanted to install his own fence and then pour his own concrete in his backyard and build his own shed from scratch, having had no experience in this world doing that kind of stuff. And yet
Yeah.
he just went for it. And I asked him, like, what makes you think you could do this, Grandpa? And he's like, because I'm humble. I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I'm humble. I'll figure it out. It's
Mm.
not that he will figure it out. Not that he's like this brilliant master, but he's teachable. He can learn
Mm. Yeah.
and he has confidence. And that's where he brought back the whole idea that to be humble is to be confident, not in yourself, but to be confident that there is, that you can get something done by tapping into higher powers beyond yourself, like tapping into the divine, like in the idea that I can do all things through God who strengthens me. But
Sure.
then also the idea that tapping into the resources that are around you, because oftentimes God's using other people. He is like his angels on earth are our teammates that are going to help buoy us up in times of need, that they're going to have the answer that we're desperate for. It's not going to be, what's that story? This guy's drowning out there in the ocean and he's praying like, "Oh God, please save me, please save me." And then this canoe comes by and the guy in the canoe is like, "Hop in, bro, we'll get you out of here." And the guy's like, "No,
Yeah.
no, no. God's going to save me. God's going to just keep going. I'm good." And then he's still praying, praying. Another guy comes along on like a wave runner or something. "Hey, I'll help you out." And he's like, "No, no, no. God's going to save." Like 3 or 4 times he rejects the offer for assistance and
Yeah.
doesn't realize that's God, right? That is the divine directing his teammates or people on earth around him to get him through. So to have confidence is to 1, be teachable. To 2, recognize that you don't have all the answers. And to
Mm.
3, be confident, not self-confident, but confident in your true self, right? In
Yeah.
who you are deep down as a child of God, one who has a divine potential. We were talking earlier about our career paths before the show kind of kicked off and the way things have kind of fallen into place, for where we end up being assigned or what leadership we end up working for, what teammates we find ourselves surrounded by,
Sure.
that there is a larger tapestry that we find ourselves in. Things that happen for a reason. And once you can embrace that, like once you can embrace that, when I'm purely confident that down the road, 20 years from now, I'm going to look back on my life and see how things fell into place to
Mhm.
lead me to where I needed to be, both as a father, as a husband, as a soldier, as a son of God. Like things were happening
Yeah.
the way they're supposed to happen. There's this old Greek quote that they would say, like amor fati, to love your fate, love
Mhm.
fate. That if you can fight it all you want and pretend that things aren't happening the way they're supposed to, and just throw your arms up and say that the whole world's combined against me, or you can embrace your fate, embrace where you are, and see it for what it is, as a stepping stone in this tapestry of life that's setting you to where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
So a long way to talk about it, but to me, humility is first and foremost a modest view of yourself, to be teachable, and
Mhm.
then lastly, to have pure confidence, not self-confidence, not like confidence that Chaz can do it, but
Yeah.
confidence that the Son of God, who I am, this divine being. I like that phrase that we are not mortal beings who have spiritual experiences every once in a while. We are spiritual beings who are in a temporary mortal existence, but we're part of still this larger plan. This larger
Yeah.
tapestry is still in the background, that things are happening for a reason.
Yeah. So you talk about humility as a means of being teachable, and I really like that. I think that's great. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. There's some psychological frameworks there that we can talk about that kind of help us with that. Specifically, growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Wow. So we both read a similar book, the one called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and she did a bunch of studies. And in these studies, they discovered that there are certain attributes of, in some cases, athletes, that an athlete with a growth mindset can demonstrate grit to learn after failure and not be turned off by it, versus natural athletes, quote unquote natural athletes, who things come to them rather quickly with facility, and then they encounter a barrier or a failure,
Hmm.
and it suddenly will cause them to go into a tailspin where they'll shut down and be like, I don't even want to play that sport anymore. I didn't win MVP, so I'm done with it. It's not for me. Versus the guy who just scrapes by and fights for every single yard in football, or is just lucky to get on the field in soccer and just bit by bit improves and demonstrates that rigor of effort over the extended window, that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Somebody with a growth mindset sees the idea of failure as an iteration. I like the
Sure.
words of Nelson Mandela in South Africa after they finished the apartheid and they're doing the Truth and Reconciliation. He got asked, like, what was it like to lose so much? Because he had lost, years of his life being imprisoned. But he said, I never lose. I either win or I learn.
Hmm.
That mindset that I never lose, I win or I learn. Athletes that can embrace that, where they are winning, or if they're losing, they're still learning. And
Yeah.
if you're learning, you're still winning. You're progressing towards where you need to get. Sarah, she maybe promised not to be too specific, but I'll tell you, I've got kids in my family. I've got 5 kids, 4 boys. All of them, I think, are just, little angels. Every
Sure.
single one of my kids. But one of my sons is, I would say, like a natural athlete. Like, he's graceful in movement. He is super quick on his feet. Everything he's tried so far, like for the most part, he ends up excelling at it
Yeah.
and does really well. My other son is like the opposite. Like, he didn't get blessed with like just large stature or intense speed. But
Yeah.
what he is gifted with is grit, like the ability to just push himself and try hard and train hard and put forth that extra bit of effort. And in both cases, they're amazing athletes. But I have seen, just like appears in the book Mindset,
Mhm.
that when we introduce a new activity, if my son, who's more of a natural athlete, he tries it and doesn't go, like if he's not number one,
Mhm.
he could do well, but if he's not number one, he's turned off. Like,
Mm.
no, I'm not, that's not for me. In fact, people
Yeah.
who play that sport, they're weirdos, I don't play that sport. Like, he just kind of builds this unnecessary barrier there. Whereas the other brother, he goes into it knowing he's gonna be terrible at first. Like, he just almost expects it. So his
Yeah.
expectations are very meager. He
Mm.
has a very modest view of what he can accomplish
There you go.
going into something brand new. And so that humble mindset, that growth mindset of, I'm probably not gonna be great, but I can get better. I can improve. I will. And that's the confidence too, where it's like pure confidence, where you're confident that you will get better.
Mhm.
If you do the right things, actions have consequences. I love the parable of the sower, that you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
If you plant corn, you're gonna get corn. If you plant strawberries, you're gonna get strawberry. If you nurture the ground, if you take care of it, then you're not gonna be, you know, it would be the rarest, weirdest occasion where you do all the necessary things to nurture the growth of whatever you've planted,
Mhm.
and for it to transform into something completely absurd. Like, you're
Yeah.
not gonna plant corn and get strawberries. You're gonna get what you plant, as long as you nurture it and do those little things, the small disciplines day in and day out.
Sure.
And I think also one last little point before I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel like you have so much to offer as well. But the last point is, if it doesn't work out, the humble mind, like the humble person, will still feel like it worked out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
If you did all the effort, hours and hours and hours of extra effort, and for my kids, for sports, and you still don't make the varsity team, you get cut from the varsity team. Hey, all right, there's next year. You could try
Yeah.
it again. Or hey, all right, you weren't meant to be on that particular team, that particular season. And here at the NTC, the unit comes in and they do everything right, and the mission still, the thing is, at NTC, the opposition forces, 11th ACR, they're good. Like, these guys,
Yeah.
they do 10 rotations a year. They know this box like the back of their hands. It's
Yep.
their home court. And so they always just schwack the good guys. Like, it's a crucible for a reason.
Yeah.
So these units will come and they'll be so excited. Like, we've done everything right. We did our rehearsals. We did our foresights. We got our PCCs, pre-combat checks complete. Everything's all set. And some of them, like, I just feel bad because I know they're about to go just get spanked by the opposition force. Like, they're going to just get swamped.
Yeah.
But the good units, they get smacked and they just say, hey, let's regroup.
Mm.
Let's reconstitute where we can. Let's get the tickets in to try to get resupply and personnel back up here. Like, they just get back into the fight rather than being knocked on their heels and be like, oh, we were supposed to, everything was right. Why didn't we win? Almost like they were entitled to win. It's like, no, you could do
Yeah.
everything right and still not get exactly what you wanted. But if you're humble, that doesn't put you on. What's that quote from, I think it's again back from like ancient Japan: get knocked down 7 times, get up 8.
Yeah. There you go. Like, going back to the mindset thing too, it's something that I've been working with my son on because he's very much so competitive because he gets it from, myself and his mom, honestly. We're both athletes in high school, in college, and so competitive that he gets so angry when things don't go the way he wants. So over the last year and a half, he's really grown because I'm trying to teach him this mindset of everything's an opportunity to grow. When you win, opportunity to grow. When you lose, opportunity to grow. And when you're playing football and you don't get all the looks you want, good. I hit him with a Jocko Willink. Good. That's an opportunity for you to get stronger with your legs. You ran the
I
route
love
really
that.
hard.
That's so good.
You got better. Good. So, just finding the silver lining, just shift the mindset from negativity to positivity, and the opportunities of growth will present themselves naturally. And you'll feel comfortable in the position of not being where you want to exactly be at, being comfortable. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable is what I'm really trying to teach him. Figuring out how to be uncomfortable and good with that. And if you can do that, there's so many things you'll be good at. I mean, I look back at my time at 1ACB, I knew nothing about aviation, and I get thrown in operations like it's, Mike, go figure it out. Go do future operations in aviation. Okay, let's go. Let me start learning. Let me start, rowing. It's not like a negative thing. I could have sat there and been like, this is not what I really want to do. I changed career paths for a reason. I wanted to become a modeling simulations officer, not go back to operations. I'm right back into it, going back over to Europe for rotation. So I could have quit right there and just, been like, I'm done. But no, it's not who I am. And my mindset was, okay, find a silver lining. Let's row. Let's figure this out. And through that, I think God really kind of gave me that and was like, hey, I really want to test you here. Can you apply this mindset? And, what are the opportunities for you to grow, and can you take advantage of them? And I walk away from 1ACB grown as a leader, especially knowing my own capabilities, also organizational capabilities, how to work better with others, how to build relationships, all those things. The growth mindset is huge as a military leader. Humility will allow you to go so far with it as long as you can choke that pride down. Let's talk about military transitions and humility.
So for me, coming back to the operations world, much like you, I was out of it for a while. I was teaching at West Point in language department, and it was great. I got a chance to go to Mozambique, Africa, and Brazil, and Portugal. It was an amazing experience working with cadets for 3 years. It was actually in the window of time where my primary platform, the Kiowa Warrior helicopter, was getting divested. So I'm like, I've got no job for a little bit. What can I do to still be able to contribute? And West Point was the place. But it's very far removed from the life we had at 1ACB, like aviation operations in in the world of the contingencies. So there we end up going together into 1ACB, and I was nervous, but I also knew, like, very confidently that things again were going to work out. That I've had experiences preceding it that were very formative. In fact, I joke that at CGSE, I I got picked for every single MDMP session to be either the XO or the S3. Like, I never got to be somebody just kind of hanging out in the background. I was always picked to be like a key leader. And, I would joke and bellyache about it to like my wife, Sarah, like, yet again, I get stuck with this hard job. And turns out those were incredibly formative experiences,
Yeah,
little microcosms, little micro doses of stress and exposure to what I would have to do in a staff role at an actual air cavalry brigade.
sure.
Because as you mentioned in previous episodes, and by the way, you were beyond kind in the way you described how things went with the Lobos. I will say I felt like when Brad Deloach did take over, he's like, "Hey man, you're doing great, Chaz. I'm so proud of you. Wow, what you've done with this team is just amazing." And I was like, "Sir, we kept it going, but the wheels are falling off." Like, like I don't even know the last time we did a command and staff meeting. I think we may be like 10 months behind on OERs. Like, there was like we had to like just narrow our priorities down to
Yeah.
war fighting. It was we were going into UCOM. We just had a change of leadership, which the departed battalion commander is still one of my personal heroes. That guy
Mhm.
is a absolutely fantastic servant leader who loves his soldiers, and it was beloved by the Lobos. So to lose him,
Sure.
had he been a complete jerk and like a terrible leader, we'd have been like, yeah, good riddance. No, he was a great leader. He was a
Yeah.
fantastic leader. So to lose him was a big hit, and I did feel like there were these just massive shoes to fill. And when our brigade commander came over and talked to me and told me that was gonna be the way forward was I would temporarily fill the role of a task force commander.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, this is the largest task force, and oh, by the way, it has the first ready to fight exercise, and then CTC at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center
Mhm.
for Allied Spirit, that's just around the corner, and I'd be the guy, in like the command seat. Good luck. I will say, I felt like about this big. A
Yeah.
modest view of yourself is humility. I felt like a minuscule view of myself. Like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna be intense. But I also that moment of feeling overwhelmed, I'll say it didn't last that long. Like, I think it was maybe an hour, 2 hours where I felt like, well, I'm really stressed out. But then a leader started, like, the brigade commander came and talked to me, gave me, like, a sit down.
Hmm.
Other buddies who were on the staff, like, other field grade officers came and talked to me. The sergeant major of the battalion came and talked to me. And so as I'm interacting with these guys, I mean, again, this is where I feel the divine hand of God. I feel like these
Yeah.
are angels. Like, they're coming in and they're reminding me that you're not alone. Like, I'm not gonna do this by myself. I'm gonna have this epic team, this, like, amazing team, and the fact that the Lobos, you know, the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf.
Yeah.
The Lobos is meant to be a family organization. It's meant to be united through the strength of everyone coming together
Hmm.
and uplifting each other, and I 100% felt that. There's a quote by Heraclitus that I really like. He's the same guy who said that, "We do not rise to our expectations, we fall to the level of our training."
Yeah.
Well, he said that in any given battle with 100 soldiers, 10 of them shouldn't even be there. 80 are just targets, but 9 are the real fighters, and we're lucky to have them, for they shall make the day. They shall make the battle. Ah, but the one is a warrior, and he'll bring the others back.
Yeah.
So to me, I had these like 9 these fighters kept coming to me. The people that were, I would 100% classify you amongst this group. Like, you were one of the fighters, one of the warriors who was helping get things done. Even though you had come from outside of aviation, outside of operations, you just committed and you were eager to have an impact. You were
Hmm.
eager to see the organization continue to go forward to where it had to get to. And I will say too, like another factor that as I'm mentoring other, soldiers and leaders, junior leaders out here, I tell them like maybe one of the most important things you can do as a leader is suffer well. Suffer with
Yeah.
dignity. When you're going through hard times, to not feel poopy pants, not feel sorry for yourself
Hmm.
because you recognize everyone else is also challenged. Everyone else is also, cold and hungry and tired and feeling overwhelmed. If if you're willing to just drive on despite feeling like there's a funny sticker I saw on a water bottle and I love it. It just says embrace the suck. Like if you can embrace the hardship, you can embrace the
Yeah.
challenging circumstances. In fact, if you can bond with your teammates who are also suffering, then you're better for it. As an organization, you will
Sure.
advance together through challenging circumstances. And then you look back, and that's the whole good mindset you just mentioned a second ago. That good, good. It's tough being separated in UCOM with multiple nodes and aircraft all over the place and combat power that we're trying to build despite, delays at the port and bad weather. All these factors are coming in,
Yeah.
and all these factors they're shaping us. They're honing us. They're helping us overcome these little challenges. Every time we overcome a little challenge, we're that much tougher, stronger as an organization, and able to do it in the future even better.
Yeah.
So when as Lobo 6 for that little window, I look back on that time as like a really special window of my life to be surrounded by such great, fantastic leaders who would invest in me, but then also to have such a receptive audience. Part of the Lobo is I really wanted, there was a small culture shift I really wanted to have happen because in the beginning, people were feeling, I would say like there was a little bit of sentiment of like poopy pants, like, we're being deployed and it's really
Yeah.
hard and we got all the stuff we gotta get done. Like there was a little bit of complaining where it wasn't where I felt it was healthy. People come back from meetings and be like, "Oh man, you just got punched in the face in that meeting." And I'm like, "But did you actually get punched in the face?" Like, did we really get we gotta be careful with the words we're using because sometimes we're painting this picture that even subconsciously we're starting to believe that we're victims. We're starting to
Yeah.
believe that we're not ready for it, that we can't handle it. And we're losing that humble mindset of being confident that, hey, we're gonna get through this. I like the quote by Colin Powell. He said, yeah, it's in his like 11 favorite pieces of advice for leaders.
Hmm.
But Colin Powell said, "Hey, things are gonna get better because we're gonna make them better.
Mm.
Like things will get better. We as a team, we're gonna come together and we're gonna make them better."
Yeah.
So when we as the Lobos, we started to embrace the idea that as a family, as a pack, we're gonna make it better. And that's why we had to shift to deeds, not words as a slogan. Because to me, like the words, we gotta fix the words, but really the deeds, the actions, our
Yeah.
behaviors. We need to adjust our behaviors and demonstrate we are soldiers. We do this stuff. We'll go out there and fight in the worst possible conditions, and we're gonna stinking love it. We'll come out better for it. So deeds, not words became the new slogan. I still remember the day I walked in and you guys all start laughing. You're like, "We said deeds, not words 3 times and you appeared." That was the funniest moment. I felt so flattered, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There it is. We had so many conversations in shop. We had so many conversations about that. It's like, people couldn't understand, like, what does that even mean? I don't understand. And I explained it just like you explained it. I said, that's exactly what it means. It's like, this is the culture shift that you're going to see. And I remember telling my peer in the shop, I said, watch, it's about to happen. It's going to happen. And it did. It was beautiful to watch. I think what you ultimately learned coming out of that was, that it wasn't doable under your own strength. You had to rely on God. You had to trust in God
100%.
and, you had to trust others to come alongside and help you. And only those that, with a modest view of their own importance, are able to do that. Embracing humility to the point of being able to accept that from others and understand that my level of control is minimal compared to God. And if I put this in God's hands and truly have trust and faith in Him, I'm going to be okay. It may not work out exactly the way I think it should, but it's going to be okay. I really love that. Let's move over and talk about humility in combat and cross-cultural environments. Specifically, humility under pressure, team integration, cultural openness. You kind of talked about this a little, but tell me about your time with Task Force Gunfighter in Afghanistan. What did humility look like in a combat environment? And, how did that really inspire team integration? And, why did humility cause that to happen?
You bet. And I would say, perhaps more so than in any other situation, humility in combat is the difference between success and failure. So for us in Afghanistan, RC South, we were the last Kiowa unit as they were pulling out of Afghanistan bit by bit. So we had deployed forward as a full squadron. And then within 3 months, they said, hey, the squadron's going home, except we're going to leave one troop. In fact, we'll call it a super troop because we'll give it an extra company of Kiowas.
Mm.
So instead of having 8, you'll have 12. And then you'll have like 72 guys instead of 38 guys. And we're going to nest you underneath the attack battalion, Task Force Gunfighters, under Colonel Parker Frawley, who, again, I've been just so lucky in my career to work for these just total rock stars, these
Sure.
leaders who were deeply competent and very approachable, but still highly assertive. Like they were fighters. They wanted to go out there and do the job we signed up for, which was, in this case, helping defend these combat outposts that were in a very vulnerable state. As they withdraw combat power, they're losing access to mutually supporting fires from adjacent formations. So more and more, we're having these isolated little combat outposts. Like Cop Keating is a tragic example of American loss of life in one of these small outposts that's being drawn down. And the enemy's wily. They're smart. They're very observant, and so they're seeing what's happening and trying to take advantage of it. So as I assimilated our super troop, bandit troop, into Task Force Gunfighter, it had to be a very deliberate effort, because what I didn't want to have happen is our troop be this autonomous Kiowa organization that is receiving some administrative support from the gunfighters. We wanted to be part of the gunfighters. We wanted to go out there as a fighting team that knew each other, trusted each other, and that had the ability to still have an impact for good, just because knowing full well that American lives are on the line, and that the balance is still up in the air for what's going to happen, not just to American forces, but to this region of the world, this country.
Yeah.
So for Task Force Gunfighters, one of the things was, and again, not my own genius, it was Parker Frawley, the squadron commander, or the battalion commander, the attack battalion commander. He immediately pulled us into all their existing events. So all their battle events, all their morale building events. He would do this thing where at the end of the night, late at night, and again, I want to sleep, but he still do it. He would get together and they would go smoke cigars out behind the hooch. I don't smoke. I don't drink. And in Afghanistan, you can't drink, but you could smoke. I don't, but he still invited me, and we sat there and had these conversations, and they were really just war stories. People were telling war stories from their last mission or their last deployment, or things that they'd heard other buddies experience. And so what we were doing in that really laid back setting was a bunch of humble guys who knew they didn't know it all were sharing what they had observed to their teammates, because maybe they had something that the other guy could learn from. And all that informal dialogue became this new norm where not every night, but multiple nights a week, we'd gather up with the squadron or the battalion commander and share best practices. And it was part of the genius of this leader was he knew that, one, we would gain resilience by having a brotherhood, where these commanders will come together, and we would, people get a little bit emotional. I'm not saying it would be a sob session, but people would reveal very candid feelings for, hey man, that one didn't go well. That shoot, we didn't come out on top. There's one occasion where in Kaya was we're chasing after a guy on a motorcycle, and we could not get this guy. Like, and this is a bad dude who just did
Mhm.
bad things, and we're trying to remove him from the playing field, being talked on by special operations forces. And we shot rockets at him, we shot 50 cal at him. He was just impervious to it.
Hmm.
And he ended up going to a compound, and in that compound, we wanted to shoot it so bad, and then revealed with some addition, we held our own a little bit patience. We were about to just level this place. And then we saw that there was like women and children in there. There were a lot of
Mm.
innocent people in this compound that if
Yeah.
we had been, a little too eager, a little too like in the heat of the moment, we could have killed a lot of people that probably didn't need to die.
Mm.
And it was in that setting where, we're not being investigated for it because we didn't, obviously things went well, but they could have not gone well pretty
Sure.
easily. And so by sharing those stories with teammates, it really helped. It helped build a bond of friendship and
Mhm.
brotherhood that carried forward into the air. And Parker Frawley also, he's a Apache guy, but he ended up flying with me in combat. And this is totally a bit of a sidebar, but my wife was pregnant with our second son, and her water breaks, and I get a text. You're not supposed to fly with your phone. I have my phone on me because my wife's pregnant, about to have a baby. So
Yeah.
I pull my phone out. I feel it vibrating. I'm not supposed to have it. And Colonel Frawley, he's like, "What you got over there?" I'm like, "Oh, Gunfighter 6. Sorry about that, sir. I'm figuring this out right now. My wife's water just broke." So he he was like, "Hey, it's totally fine. Let's get you on back. We'll do a crew swap. We'll figure this out."
Yeah.
He worked with me, and we're in the middle of a combat mission. Like, we're flying out in the middle of nowhere, and there are good guys in a convoy. We're providing direct support,
Mhm.
but he saw the bigger picture. He saw that my family was in a position where, and me personally, as a husband and father, my mind couldn't possibly be 100% in the fight because I
Sure.
love my wife. I know
Yeah.
this is a pivotal moment. So he worked it out to where I'd get back. And just again, to show that there's a higher power at play, that God loves me and loves all of us. I land a helicopter, I get out and run away. My buddy jumps in, takes off, and they're back in the fight. And as I'm running back towards my hooches, I end up coming across I have a cousin whose name is Allen. Like, so
Mhm.
his name's Parker Allen. He's a warrant officer. He was stationed in the same overarching organization, but well away. Like, he was at another combat outpost, many, many miles away.
Yeah.
But he had just randomly showed up for a maintenance test flight back at Kandahar Mustang Ramp, and we just bumped into each other. Like, I'm running in, and he's like walking back from the flight line, and I'm like, "Parker," he's like, "Chaz," and we give each other a big hug. I'm like, "Parker, my wife's having a baby right now," and he's like, "No way, yes," and he gives me a big high five, and I'm like, it was a little moment, just a little
Yeah.
moment of being with family in a moment that I I'll never forget, right? And
Mm.
luckily, my son was born healthy and happy, and Sarah was totally fine. Like, blessings all across, miracles and blessings across the board.
Yeah.
But to be in an environment where, one, I had a great leader in the task force and the attack battalion who hooked me up, and then to cross my family member who happened to be in a combat theater at the same time, and then to have the connectivity, like the Wi-Fi was always in and out. That day, the
Mm.
Wi-Fi was just pristine, and I was able to literally like FaceTime in with my wife while
Yeah.
she's having our child. To me, this was just like a special experience and confirmation that things are happening for a reason. We're
Yeah.
part of a higher plan. So just those are a couple little things on how humility did matter. And for me in an
Mhm.
organization, for Bandit Troop, all of our guys, I told them, look, we're about to become part of an attack battalion. Like, these are Apache guys. It's a different world, different
Mhm.
framework, different mindset, and we're just going to embrace it. Like, we will just jump in and kind of do what they do. If they talk a certain way, hey, we're gonna talk a certain way on the radios. If they have a way of doing business for their missions and pre-missions, we're gonna do that too. Like, we will fully embrace the fact that we are guests in their organization
Sure.
and just eager to serve. And once they got a wind of that, like the attack battalion felt like we were team players and that we wanted to be there, that we were not
Mhm.
forced to be there against our will, and also that we didn't have all the answers, we weren't know-it-alls, that we were willing to ask questions and learn from them, and then offer up lessons learned from our own side. That mutual experience of like shared professionalism, it became the norm.
Yeah.
And I look back on that with incredible fondness. In fact, I will still think of myself as a gunfighter in a lot of ways. I was only with them for 9 months, but those 9 months, I was a gunfighter.
Yeah, it seems like a small aspect, but humility does play a huge important role in being able to absorb that transformation and make that change. Which kind of brings me to the next point in talking about humility versus pride. Pride leads to downfall, but humility is the path to true honor and lasting elevation. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And I look at my time in Afghanistan when I was a battalion of 6 for actually a GSAB out of 1st ID in Fort Riley, Kansas. So in Afghanistan, I have a huge sense of arrogance about myself. I'm crushing it. I know I'm crushing it. So there's just a huge amount of pride and arrogance come over me. And I got really, I have a really great team. You know, my guys are rock stars. I'm trusting them with everything, and we're just crushing it. Everything's good. The Brigade of 6 calls one day and says, hey, we have to do a ComSec changeover for our BFT2 top kits. Go ahead and change over. Okay, got it. Brigade brings down the keys. We go load them up. Doesn't work. And I'm like, all right, no worries. My guys got this. Go ahead and figure it out. So they're dissecting it, trying to go through, and they say, sir, we can't make this work. I was like, what do you mean you can't make it work? You guys are rock stars. You always make it work. What's going on? And they're showing me, they're like, it literally does not work. I was like, okay, I trust you guys. So I call back up the Brigade of 6, and I'm like, it doesn't work, ma'am. And she says, it absolutely works. It works for all the other units. It should work for yours. And what was not known at the time is the BFT transceiver models were a little different from the ones we had versus what they had. So it worked just fine for them, just wouldn't work for us. So
That's all it takes.
we tried to convince her, ma'am, it doesn't work. Please send your guys. And she's like, okay. So they come down, they can't get it to work, and she's not coming off of it. Like, no, it works. It works for other units. I'm like, well, it doesn't work for us. And I can't afford to drop ComSec for the next couple of missions that are coming up. So my pride gets the better of me, and I'm like, I'm not going to fail. I'm going to do this. So I go and seek another unit on Bagram and draw a ComSec from them. And it works. I was thinking, we're good to go now. I report to the Brigade 6 that ComSec is finally up. And the Brigade 6 says, what happened? And I said, I went and drew ComSec from another unit. Like, here we go. My battalion commander's like, Mike, it's okay. You're good to go. You had to make the mission happen. It's all good. But what I couldn't understand at the moment, and the Brigade XO came down to talk to me personally, just walked in and is like, you, come here. We're going outside. So he goes to sit down, and he's like, Mike, you're right. But you burned a relationship because of it. And there was a better way to go about that. And you let your pride get you. Okay. And because of that, you burned a relationship, and that's going to negatively affect you, whether you know it or not.
Right.
At the moment, I was like, really? You know, and then I really thought about it and sat down and was like, wow, there really was a better way to handle that. And I should have done that. Had I been more humble in the moment, had a little bit more humility, I could have taken a moment to get a breath and try and figure out, what's a different way to navigate this problem set to maintain this relationship and still fix the problem. That's where you truly start to grow and become great leaders. Any one of us can step in a position if you're confident and halfway know what you're doing. It can be successful. Those leaders that are capable of leading organizations really well understand how to maintain relationships. And it starts with humility. Another good verse is Luke 14:11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And so there's all these little verses in the Bible I look back at now, and I'm like, man, that really resonates heavily with me in those moments. Let's talk about a little bit about the trap of pride in leadership. How have you seen pride cause a fall in military life?
So, as mentioned, I've had a lot of fantastic leaders. I've just been blessed, like one after the next. Great, great examples. But I've also, like many of us, had a chance to work for guys that you don't necessarily want to emulate. There's behaviors that you find less productive or just make it tough to wake up in the morning and go to work. The ones that were hard to work for almost always connected back to pride, where they had all the answers. They didn't want to hear what you had to say. And despite, like you had mentioned just with your ComSec challenge, you're presenting the reasons why you're trying to do what you're doing, and they still just won't see it. And often it's a barrier of pride. And I'm not saying I'm immune to it. In fact, there's probably folks who are talking about me right now saying that, let's listen to that guy talk about humility when he's the most prideful turd I've ever met. Like, I'm not immune to it. In fact, nobody is immune to pride. That's why it does come before the fall for so many people, because there's seeds of pride in all of us that if we don't constantly try to temper it down with active humility, then the default is it will take over. I
Yeah.
love that quote by, what's the name of the guy? Doggone. He says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Mm.
And I would just modify that.
Yeah.
It was Sir Edmund Burke in England said that. But the tweak here is the only thing necessary for a man to become prideful is for him to not be humble, right? To not
Mhm.
actively try to be humble, then you will by default become prideful. You will
Sure.
be absorbed in your own sense of greatness, or you'll be inflated by your sense of ability that is probably false. We talked
Mm.
about the Dunning-Kruger effect before this, where
Yeah.
it's a psychological phenomenon that happens in almost every domain of life, where if you're looking at the y-axis and the x-axis, that as you're new to something, you gain a lot of confidence really early in the process.
Mhm.
Like you feel like, hey, this isn't even that bad. What are people talking about? This isn't that hard. And then you experience some kind of fall where you're exposed to the true complexity of whatever this topic may be. I
Mhm.
love to use my son because teenagers are so perfect for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like every day, teenagers they embody the Dunning-Kruger effect. So my son, he hops in the car. He's like, I could drive a car. What are you talking about? This isn't like that hard. Move the steering wheel, push the brake, press the gas. This is easy. So he hops in there and he feels super confident. And then we show him we have a Jeep, and this Jeep is a manual transmission, and you
Mm.
got to somehow use a clutch all of a sudden, and then
Yeah.
you're going up hills, and if you put the clutch in, the Jeep rolls backwards. So on the Dunning-Kruger effect, typically, you'll have this a great amount of confidence early in your exposure to a domain,
Mhm.
but then as you get more and more exposure, you experience this slide where people call it sometimes the valley of despair, where you realize, oh man, I really don't have this figured out. Like your
Yeah.
confidence level plummets. You're
Yeah.
humbled by just the reality of how challenging most things really are. And then you come to the slope of enlightenment where with time and exposure and extra effort, you become truly confident. Like you
Yeah.
earn that level of confidence. So my son was learning to drive this Jeep Rubicon, and it took some humility to go out there and get some practice in with Sarah. She's like the resident like manual vehicle instructor in our family, and helped him gain confidence over
Yeah.
time. But many of us, we find ourselves at that peak of the Dunning-Kruger effect where we're new to something, we think we're really good at it, and there's so much more to be learned.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges for the senior leaders that are, in the military is with rank comes a lot of respect and a lot of deference.
Mhm.
People will do what you say by virtue of your authority, virtue of your rank. And it is tragic to see the number of senior leaders that have been dismissed or experienced punitive action
Yeah.
because of, adulterous affairs or misuse of government funds. Like these things where sometimes people become, I'll just say, I had a good friend of mine, a real good friend of mine, who it's almost like a cautionary tale where we were cadets at West Point together. He was a captain for one of the premier teams at West Point.
Mhm.
He went to serve in a very selective branch and then got selected for special operations. And we ended up being together for a follow-on training. And we're good friends. So we're buddies. We're lifting together. And
Mhm.
he's getting more jacked than I am by far. And I'm like, how are you getting so jacked? This is crazy. But we're lifting together,
Yeah.
and turns out he was using steroids and selling
Mm.
steroids, and he got busted in selling steroids.
Yeah.
And I think what happened is this guy he had walked on water for so long that he thought the rules didn't apply to him anymore. Like he had never failed at anything. He was number one at
Mm.
everything he did. Like number one, number one, number one. Assessed, selected.
Mm.
Just did so many incredible things. And
Yeah.
frankly, he deserved it. He is a super fit, super smart, very capable, charismatic, hardcore dude who I want that guy fighting America's wars. Like that's the kind of guy I do want out there.
Yeah.
With the caveat that I want him also to be humble. I want him also to be the best version of himself.
Yeah.
And so when he got busted, he reached out to me and said, "Hey man, I need help. I need a character statement, please." Like, and frankly, I'm eager to give him a character statement because he is a
Mhm.
fantastic person. But that one flaw, pride, ended up being the downfall. And frankly, in the end, the Army lost a great, great leader, and it traces its way back to pride, feeling
Yeah.
like you're above the law. Feeling like things don't apply to you like they apply to
Yeah.
everybody else, and that you're not. So to be humble is to also be, Jesus Christ was known to be humble, meek, and submissive.
Mhm.
So in the Army, we should submit ourselves to the process. Submit ourselves to like the rules and regulations that we were sworn to uphold and protect. Submit ourselves to the Constitution, right? And the rights and obligations found inside the Constitution as a source document.
Yeah.
We submit ourselves to the role we play as leaders. Like that takes some confidence and humility to be willing to do that. And again, there's another word that society doesn't like, but to me, I do. I think we
Mhm.
should be humble and submissive and meek in our role and confident in its execution.
Yeah, and humility actually protects you and enables you to kind of pull yourself back from that really high of what pride can do to you. There were so many times Wade and I would travel all over Europe. It's like, dude, we could sit here in a house back 7 or 8 beers. Nobody would ever know. But we both understood, hey, that's wrong. Our own sense of humility, a sense,
Easily.
yeah, I
No one would
I
know.
would know, you would know, I would know that you know. And so being able
Yeah.
to do those little things as a
You would know.
leader is super important. It keeps you grounded and it keeps you within the realm of understanding what's important in the grand scheme of things. And if you can do that, you will continue to succeed. That's the only way you can go. So, as we wrap up the episode, looking at some practical takeaways, what would you say is the one thing leaders can do to really try and grow humility as a Christian military leader? What's that one thing? I know it's going to be hard, but what's that one thing you can think of to do or practice on a daily basis that military leaders can implement and kind of see some immediate change?
Well, I think you said it well in staying connected to the Word of God. By studying Scripture, by studying ancient wisdom, you will ground yourself in a way that it's hard to do in other means. And I'm all for reading self-help books. I'm all for reading military doctrine. You got to do it.
Yeah.
But in the background, there should be this connection to long-lasting, long-lasting spiritual guidance that
Mhm.
has stood the test of time. This is ancient wisdom that exists for a reason. So staying connected to that is, I think, a simple, important way. And as you're doing it, it's almost like you're meditating, by the way, because
Mhm.
you're reading ancient documents that are forcing you to apply it to your own life. And like, how can I exhibit this behavior that I'm reading about? So that process it's like a self-fulfilling process where you're taking words and turning them into deeds in your daily basis. So deeds, not words. It's what you do during the day that originated with the things that you read that'll help change you to a better man.
Yeah, I love it. And so what we kind of built on that too is a self-reflection piece that comes along with that. Being able to be in the word every day enables you to have that self-reflection needed to make those little micro changes you need to make sure you stay on the right track and understand, hey, I'm becoming a little bit prideful right now. And with all the success I've had, being in the word of God will actually lead you down a path of, I need to check you on this. Now I need to check you on that. Hey, did you do good on this? Here's a verse for that. I'm a firm believer that God speaks to us through his word. And if we give him that time every day, he will speak those truths into our lives and will help us to naturally develop these attributes that Jesus had as a leader. Humility is one that we absolutely have to have as a leader. And it's something that not very many leaders out there in the military have and practice daily, but it is something that I guarantee you soldiers will look at and say, that's different. I like that. I want to be next to that. I want to serve with that leader. So I would just challenge all the listeners out there, do some self-reflection on your current leadership style and think to yourself, am I truly humble? Am I truly displaying acts of
Agreed.
humility in my daily
That's
interactions
right.
with other people? And my perspectives on the organization, how I think about the organization and how I think about other people and relationships, is that humble? And, if there's any sense in that humility is not where it needs to be, you need to do a deep dive and jump back into the word and pray about it. And I promise you, God will make it known and evident to you what needs to change. And if you make that change, there's only good successes going to come for you. So, sir, as we wrap this up, I want to give you a chance to kind of give any kind of final words if you have any final words.
And I'll just say thanks again. This is a fantastic opportunity. And just the one last disclaimer is I definitely don't want to claim like I've figured out humility and that I'm perfect embodiment of it. But I definitely will admit that it is a lifelong process. So to stay humble, to stay teachable, and to be confident that you're part of something bigger than yourself and that things will work out the way they're supposed to. Well, I'm wholeheartedly behind that.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on and just stepping out in your faith and talking to us and everyone else about this. It's a very important topic, and I hope they learned something. I know I've learned something, and every time I talk to you, I learn
No, thanks.
something. So I really appreciate that. Will you do us the honor of praying us out?
Yeah, be very happy to. So allow me just to say a quick prayer. Dear God, please bless the men and women in uniform, serving and protecting not just our nation, but the nations of the free world. And please bless that we can be humble, that we can trust in Thee and trust in Christ and be more like Him as our exemplar. And as we do that day by day, help us to find ways to be a force for good for our families and all those around us. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this episode. Tune in next week as we start a new series, Lead Like Jesus, where we look at some iconic attributes of Jesus' leadership and how we can apply those as military Christian leaders. See you then. Thanks.